Welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to build a basic Webpack workflow compiling ES6 code with Babel to ES5 code so that it runs in all browsers, and compiling SCSS, which is a superset to CSS, to CSS code so that it also runs in the browser, so that whilst developing, we can use more features which make our developers' life easier, using ES6 features, using SCSS, which really enhances the way you write your CSS code, makes it more fun to write that code, a bit easier, gives you more features. And we still get an app in the end which runs in all browsers because we compile everything to code which can be parsed, which can be understood by all browsers. As mentioned, we're going to use Webpack for that. And if you're brand new to Webpack 2, check out the other videos I made about it here on my channel, where I explain the basics, the core concepts, and how to get started. I assume that you have that basic knowledge in this video. Now here's the starting project we're starting with. And in the video description, you'll find a link to a GitHub repository where you can also find this branch holding this starting project here. So let's start. And of course, since we want to use Webpack, we need to install it. The first step is to therefore initialize this project with npm nodes package manager, which I will use to manage all the dependencies in this project. Before doing so though, let me quickly walk you through the project. We of course have our index.html file here, and there we have a couple of buttons and a paragraph. We don't have any imports, neither a script nor a CSS import, as you can tell. And then we got our CSS and JavaScript folder in the source folder. In the CSS folder we're using SCSS though. We got this colors variable where we define some colors and store them in variables. This variable file holds these variables. That's a SCSS feature, variables. If you want to learn more about SCSS, simply Google for Sass, which is the underlying language you could say, to learn which features you may use there. And in the main.scss file, I'm using these variables to basically give the buttons in the index.html file some stylings, because the buttons will have these IDs attached to them. In the JavaScript folder, we got the app.js file, where I get references to some DOM elements like the paragraph and the buttons. And then we have some functions which I want to execute here. I use event listeners to execute them. I use ES6 arrow functions here. I also use const, which is a ES6 feature. And I want to use the random generator, which is not a built-in JavaScript object or class. Instead, it's my own class defined here in the random generator.javascript file. So here I'm using another ES6 feature, class and export. That's the thing we're starting with. Now, as I mentioned, let's initialize this project with npm to be able to install some dependencies. For that, I will run npm init, and so that I don't have to answer all these questions, I will run -y, which will answer them all with yes. This will give me the package.json file. It contains some things I don't want to have here, don't need that. So that's the basic file I'm going to go with, that setup here. Maybe put my name in here. Of course, that's purely optional and up to you. And with that setup, I can now use npm to install some things. So I will use npm install to, of course, start with Webpack. So let's npm install Webpack. And let's also grab the Webpack dev server. I also created a video about that. And this server will be used so that we can see our application run while we develop it. So I want to use Webpack and Webpack dev server. And I'll also store and enter the package.json file by putting --save dev behind the npm install command. This will pull down the files, the packages, and give me an entry in the package.json file. Now, whilst this is running, we can already create the Webpack config file. So webpack.config.js. This is the file where we will configure our Webpack workflow. And as you learned it in my other videos, we will use module exports to export our configuration, a JavaScript object. And there we got some basic building blocks. At least we need an entry and an output element so that we can tell Webpack where to start and what to create. So let's start with entry. And I want to start with the app.js file. This should be where Webpack starts analyzing my project, because this will later be where I put all my imports. So let's reference it as a relative path seen from the config file on /, then the source folder, and then it's in the JavaScript folder, the app.js file. And this will be where Webpack starts analyzing my project. Since it starts there, this is where we should use some imports, and we need them anyways. If we have a look at the app.js file, we're not importing the random generator, we're exporting in this file. So let's add an import at the top. I'm going to use an ES6 import, which is supported by Webpack by default, even if you're not installing an ES6 transpiler, as we will do, so that we can also compile the rest of this code, which will not be supported by Webpack out of the box. So let's import from our random generator file, which lives in the same folder, and we don't need to put the file extension there because .javascript is an extension automatically detected by Webpack. And here I want to import the random generator class. That's one thing. We also need to take care about the SCSS code. Here in the main.scss file, I need to import my color variables. And we can do this by using @import a SCSS feature and then referencing colors like that. This will grab our colors file and import it and add it to this SCSS file. So that is SCSS code up here. Now with that added, we also need to import the main.scss file into our JavaScript file. And whilst it might sound strange to import CSS or SCSS into JavaScript, this is just how Webpack works. And it will not put the code into the JavaScript file in the end. Of course, you can't mix it like this, but it will start analyzing it. And if it then hits the SCSS files or a CSS file, we just need to ensure that we installed the right loaders so that Webpack is able to actually pull out the SCSS or CSS code and then put it somewhere else, for example, into the head of our page. And you learned this in my other videos too. So let's make sure to go to the app.js file, and at the top I also want to add an import, here using the JavaScript import syntax, pointing to my CSS folder and then the main.scss file, like this. This will make sure that I also import this file and that Webpack will find it whilst it analyzes my code. Because keep in mind, app.js is my starting point, so it is there where we need to reference all the files we want Webpack to take care about. So that's the entry part. Now we want to create something, so we need an output here too. An output is a JavaScript object where we define the path and then the file name. The path should be an absolute path. And for that, we can use a little Node.js package to help us, a package you automatically have if you installed Node.js, as you did, otherwise you wouldn't use npm. This is the path package, and we install it by using require path like this. So that is our import of the path package. And we can then use it, and there's specifically the resolve method, to create an absolute path using a helper variable we have available here, --underscore dir name, which gives us simply the current directory, but it gives us an absolute path to that directory. And then, well, the folder we want to store our files in, and that would be the dist folder, which doesn't exist as of now, but which will be created dynamically. So that's the path. The file name should be bundle.js for the JavaScript code. We'll take care about the CSS part later with a specific loader or plugin to be precise. So this is where we will store it, what we want to create, right? That's nice, but right now it would not really work. If we create a script in the package.json file, let's name it build, and all we do there is we run webpack dev server like this. Now let's find out what happens if I now run npm run build, so if I now execute this script. You see, it gives us an error. And if we broaden this, if we just make this a bit wider, we see that it can't handle the import syntax in the SCSS file because it doesn't understand SCSS. And that makes sense because we installed no help for Webpack. By default, it doesn't understand SCSS. We need a loader for that. We need a couple of loaders to be precise, because whilst it will understand ES6, our browser wouldn't, or at least not all browsers would. So we also need to transpile the ES6 code. And that is why you're watching this video anyways, right? So let's make sure we install all the loaders and libraries we need to successfully compile our code. I'm going to use npm install again. And here, for SCSS, I need the sass-loader, because SCSS in the end uses sass. This will kind of translate SCSS to something, well, to CSS in the end. Sass-loader needs node sass, which is a package which in the end does the translation. Sass-loader only is the plugin or what we put into Webpack to enable Webpack to do so. And besides the sass-loader, I then also need the CSS loader to do something with the CSS we get, because CSS is nice, but we still can't handle this in JavaScript. And now we could use the style loader to inject that CSS into the head of our page. And I showed this in other videos. But here I actually don't want to do this. Instead, I will use some plugin, the extract text Webpack plugin, a very short name, which will allow us to get all the compiled CSS code and put it into its own file, so that we can import a separate file holding our CSS code, which makes sure that it doesn't depend on JavaScript getting loaded. Because if you use the other approach, well, in the end, it will get injected into the head part of your section as soon as your JavaScript code was loaded in the running page. If for some reason JavaScript is turned off or doesn't execute successfully, the page will have no styling too. Therefore, this is the approach which decouples the two things. So that's taking care about the SCSS and CSS part, but we're also using ES6. And as mentioned, Webpack understands ES6, but it doesn't compile it to ES5. So the browser or older browsers, Internet Explorer obviously, won't be able to handle it. Therefore, we need to compile ES6, and for that we're going to use Babel, which is a transpiler doing that. We need to install Babel core, which is basically doing the translation, or the transpiling I should say. Then we also need babel-loader, just like with node sass and the sass-loader, one does the actual job and the other plugs it into our Webpack flow. Babel-loader does the latter, it connects it to Webpack. And we also need to install some rules, because Babel core by default is able to do the transpilation, but we need to tell it, hey, which features do you want to be able to compile? For that, we're going to install a preset, and there are loads of different presets you can use. I will choose the Babel preset ES 2015, which will unlock all the ES6 features basically. So that is the preset, that is the loader, and that is Babel core, and the same for sass. Now with that, I will add --save dev to also store some references in the package.json file. And this will now download everything, create entries in the package.json file, and then we can continue tweaking our Webpack config file to use all these features, to use all these loaders and so on. So now that it's finished, I can go back to my Webpack file, and obviously we want to do something with the modules, so with our files now. Here, as you learned in the other videos, we set up some rules, which is an array of rules. And there we simply have rules where each rule is a JavaScript object. Now, we want to test something, so test when this specific rule, this JavaScript object, should apply. Test takes a regular expression, and I want to test for the file extension, here beginning with JavaScript. So all JavaScript files should in the end be compiled to ES5. So I test for JavaScript files, and then I want to use something that is an array, and here I specify all the loaders I want to use. Now, the short syntax is to just specify babel-loader here, like this, just a string in this array. And I could have multiple loaders. The problem is, I also want to configure this loader, because babel-loader by default almost does the job. But what else did we install? Well, our preset. And I need to tell babel-loader which preset to use. We only have one, but the babel-loader doesn't know that. So I will not use this shortcut. Instead, the longer version, where I pass a JavaScript object to this array. Then I define the loader key, where I say babel-loader. So that is what we could have done with the shortcut. But I'll define another key, and that is options. And this allows me to configure this loader. And of course, this is available for pretty much any loader. Of course, you need to check out the options the specific loader offers, which you can find in the documentation of that loader. So here in options, that's another JavaScript object, and we could define a couple of things about the babel-loader and check its documentation to learn what you can configure. I'm interested in defining the presets I want to use, and that is an array, and here I only have one, ES 2015, but you could have more presets to unlock more features of ES7, for example, already. That is our babel-loader transpiling our JavaScript code, and that is all the rules I want to set up for JavaScript. I will add another rule though. Of course, this one being responsible for SCSS now. Here I will also test, and as I just mentioned, I want to test for SCSS files, so I will check for the SCSS file extension with this regular expression. I then will also use something, and now here I will not just define my loaders in an array. The reason for this is that I want to extract my compiled CSS file code into a separate file. So just running the code through the loaders doesn't do the trick. I need to use the plugin we installed, this extract text Webpack plugin. Now correctly you could say, yeah, watched your earlier videos, we have that plugin property we can define, so after module here. And you're right, and we will use it, but this plugin also needs to know what it should extract, and that what should I extract part is actually defined here in our rules. First of all, I need to install the plugin though. So here, I will fetch the extract text plugin by using require and then extract text Webpack plugin, so this very short plugin name we installed. And then I will configure it a little bit more. I will name it extract plugin here to now instantiate it basically with some configuration. And in this configuration, you, can configure some things about the plugin. Again, search the official documentation by Googling the plugin. The thing I'm interested in is configuring the file name, because as I told you, this plugin will take our CSS code and put it into a separate file. Well, obviously, we need to tell it how to name that file. So I will name it main.css, but of course, this file name is totally up to you. With that configured, we can go down and back to this CSS rule here in use. I will use extract plugin, the variable we defined here, which holds our initialized extract plugin. And I will call the extract method. To this extract method, I now pass a JavaScript object, and in here, I now again define use, and that is where I now set up the loaders. So that's just a pattern used by this plugin, that you use it in a rule, in the use section, and then you wrap the loaders you want to use in the end. That's just a pattern you can remember for this plugin here. And of course, this is also explained in the documentation of this plugin. So here we got two loaders, and since I won't configure these loaders in any way, I can again use the shortcut of just having a couple of strings here in this array. So I will use the CSS loader, but first I want to run it through the SCSS loader, and keep in mind I told you that this array is parsed from end to start. So the last element in this array is the first loader which gets applied. That's just how Webpack works. So we first parse the SCSS code and transpile it to CSS, and then CSS would still not be able to be handled in a JavaScript file, and remember, we do import it into a JavaScript file in the end. Then we need the CSS loader so that Webpack is also able to import CSS into JavaScript. As mentioned before, it doesn't really add it to the JavaScript file, but at least it understands what this import means. And since we wrap this all in the extract plugin, this will now come in and pick up the compiled CSS code and put it into the separate file. To be precise, it almost does this. Here, we simply tell the plugin what to extract, but to really use it, we need to use that plugins property we also define in our config object itself. Plugins is an array, and we define all the plugins we want to run our final code through. And of course, we want to use the extract plugin just like that, just a reference to this or just this variable we initialized here. And this will now pick up the configuration from above, and then here what we wrap with it. And at the end, we'll take all the pieces it has, all the information it has, to put them together and store our CSS code in that separate file. And that's our finished config file. Now, it would be nice seeing that in action, wouldn't it? So, to see it in action, there's one more thing I need to do for the Webpack dev server. Since our index.html file is in the root folder, and our compiled files will live in a dist folder, since that is what we define here, I need to add one other property in the output, and that's the public path, where I say that the files will be in a dist folder. I do set up the path here, but that's an absolute path. Now here I need to set up the relative path, or the path as seen from the index.html file on, so that the Webpack dev server knows where to look for these for these elements, basically. So that is all the setup I need. Now, to also see something, of course, we need to change our index.html file, because right now we're not importing anything. We know that at the end, we will have two files. We will have a bundle.js file for the JavaScript code and a main.css file for the CSS code. Both will be placed in the dist folder. So in the index.html file, I'll be able to import that by simply adding a link here where I want to reference the dist folder and then main.css. And at the bottom of the page, a script import where I will reference dist bundle.js. These are the two things I want to import. Now with that in place, let's rerun npm run build and see if this now works. And I do get an error because I made a mistake. It's of course not called SCSS loader, it's called sass-loader, and you could have figured it out by having a look at the package.json file. So, little mistake on my side, let's restart the build process. Nice to see that it's tiny things like these which fail in the end. This looks better. Now let's go to the URL our Webpack dev server is running at here, localhost 8080. And if we go there, we see a running application. Styling seems to work. And if I click on that, I indeed create a random numbers which I output below. So that seems to work. If we open the console, we also don't see an error, also not up on reloading. And therefore our compilation and the loading of the files seems to be successful. Now as a final step, I also want to build this for production. And of course you can always tweak all these things, but we will dive deeper into more advanced setups in the future. For now, I'll simply add a build prod script here where I will execute just Webpack, not the dev server, because I don't want to host them on a server. I really want to get the artifacts which I can do which I can deploy. Webpack-p will build for production and also minify the code. Again, you can tweak this all even more to control how minification happens and so on. So we're running npm build prod. I now create a dist folder in this root folder. Here it is. And there we get a bundle.js file and a main.css file. And as you can tell, this is minified as this is really compact. And now if we were to deploy that in a dist folder and the index.html file in the folder above this, of course you can also tweak this workflow to have it all in the in the dist folder, and we will do this in the future. But this would be how you deploy it right now. And with that, you get a finished basic workflow using ES6 and SCSS and hopefully seeing how all these things come together and how Webpack works. Now, as mentioned, this is a workflow we can still tweak and which we will probably do in future videos to also have the index.html file in the dist folder maybe, to use tree shaking, a feature I will explain in the future. And now with that all finished, let me finally go through what we're doing here step by step again so that it is really super clear. If you already understand everything, you may of course already leave the video and I hopefully see you back in other videos. Now, let's see what's happening here. We had a app.js file at the beginning and we have the random generator.js file, which we import in the app.js file. And then we had some SCSS files. We also imported main.scss in the app.js file. We imported the colors SCSS file in the main SCSS file. And now we want to use Webpack. So how does Webpack, well, go through our files? How does the flow look like? We could say we have two different processes here because we have a SCSS build process and a JavaScript build process. Of course, in the end, handled by Webpack in one file, but these are two different rules we apply. So let's start with the JavaScript process. We use the babel-loader to transpile ES6 to ES5, and babel-loader uses some rules, as you'll learn, some presets, the ES 2015 preset. That's nice. In the end, this will result in a bundle.js file. The SCSS workflow is a bit more complicated. Here, we first use the sass-loader to compile SCSS, sass, to CSS. But CSS still can't be handled by JavaScript. So we need the CSS loader to tell Webpack, it's fine, this import is okay, this is just a CSS file which I will handle somehow. Now we could handle it with the style loader to inject it into the head of our page. But instead here we use the extract text plugin to extract it into its own file, into its own CSS file, which in the end will result in the main.css file. And this is how you could depict the process we created in the last minutes in this video. And with that, it's hopefully super clear how that all works. Now, I'm really looking forward to dive deeper into Webpack together with you in future videos. Have a great time. Bye.